Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. Now, the parish dear chair, parish dear chair, evet, steering committee for health and safety exclusive, Professor Andrew Curran, and the manager international affairs parish, Jan Michiel Meeuwsen. We talk about parish activities during COVID pandemic period and will share their experience.
Okay.
Now, Mr. Talk now.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will start to share my screen now. Can you see the screen now, Mr. Chair? Yeah? Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome everybody in this presentation organized by PEROSH, as was introduced by our chair. PEROSH stands for the Partnership on Research in Europe on Occupational Safety and Health. We will do a joint presentation. So my name is Jan Michiel Meeuwsen, and Andrew Curran from the HSE, the Health and Safety Executive of the United Kingdom, will also share their experiences with indeed the COVID-19 platform that was initiated by PEROSH. First, I would like to share a bit of information with you on PEROSH. Maybe PEROSH is not so familiar to some of you, so just a few words on PEROSH, and then we will go to the presentation on the COVID-19 platform. As I said, PEROSH stands for Partnership of European Research, Occupational Safety and Health, and we aim to improve the quality and effectiveness of European research in OSH. That is our specific area. We promote research in key areas that we find important or that we have identified as important. And the research results of our members will be, or we are disseminating this throughout Europe. A small history, the partnership was founded in Rome in 2003, and we revised every now and then our agreement of collaboration. And 2 years ago, we celebrated the 15th year of existence of PEROSH with all the members in Germany, in Bonn. We organize our own research conferences. The last one was in Copenhagen last year. That seems like ages ago, where we could still meet in pre-COVID times. And we started with these research conferences in 2015, and by now we had 3 of them exclusively for the researchers of our member institutes. We also have a very famous series of so-called well-being conferences. This is organized by a group of researchers from several member institutes within PEROSH. And this group started in 2010 in Helsinki, Finland. And the last one was also last year in May in Paris, where we had a huge conference, which is also open to all researchers from Europe and internationally. And I think we had more than 300 participants, all discussing well-being at work. And the next conference is planned in Krakow in Poland in 2022. This gives you an overview of the members of PEROSH. We are with 14 member institutes, and perhaps some of you familiar with research in occupational safety and health will recognize a few of those institutes. We have the Finnish Institute of Occupational Health, for instance. We have the Polish Institute, CHOP PIB, also quite famous institute with a long history. We have the Spanish Institute, INSST, the French Institute, perhaps some of you will see familiar names. And just in the top, I would like to highlight our latest member, which is called MINAC, and that is a institute from Sweden, which joined the PEROSH group. We have 8 joint research projects currently, and all in all those institutes form a pool of around 2,000 OSH experts. Just our main activities, and then I will jump to our COVID-19 presentation. The main activities are pooling resources and create new knowledge between these research institutes, European-wide. We disseminate this knowledge. We have a very nice website. Please have a look. You will find it easily on the internet, where you can download also a lot of documentation and output of our joint research. Our members provide the evidence base for national and EU level policies. We give the facts and the figures, and it's up to politicians and governments to act on that. And we identify new OSH research challenges. Yeah, this is our organization. I am the coordinator, and Andrew is one of the members of the steering committee. In the steering committee of PEROSH, you will find all the directors of the member institutes. We have an executive committee which convenes every month to discuss daily issues. We have our projects, of course, joint projects, and we have a scientific steering group where Mary Trainer, who is a colleague of Andrew Curran, is currently chairing this group, and where the scientific program is defined. Okay. Okay, now to our presentation. The presentation will be on the PEROSH COVID-19 coordination platform that we have initiated. And I will share a few words with you on how we did this, what are the findings, and what are the results, and what is the output of this platform. And then Andrew will share with you the experiences in the United Kingdom on how they made use of this shared information. Here you see a screenshot of the digital platform that we have. It's for members only, so it's just the researchers of PEROSH that are a member, who are a member of this platform. And you see here sort of timeline where all sorts of questions can be posted, or documents or articles, all related to COVID-19. And specifically, we are focusing on respiratory protective equipment because in the beginning of the pandemic, there was a huge demand on knowledge around RPEs, so-called respiratory protective equipment. Here you see in the screenshot an overview of folders where we store the guidelines and the docs that we have collected in Europe, but also from the US, where the CDC from the US immediately produced very nice information in English on the COVID-19 pandemic. Some facts and figures of this platform. It was operational 26th of March 2020. It was an initiative by Andrew himself. Andrew sort of woke up all PEROSH members and was saying, hey guys, let's join forces because this is a huge thing that is coming to us. And we have so much knowledge in all these European countries we are based in. Let's join forces. So as I said, questions and answers to those questions are posted. All these experts, 77 at the moment, can reply to these questions or can raise questions. And besides PEROSH, we also have members from the so-called Sheffield group. Andrew Curran, by the way, is the chair of the Sheffield group. And this is the international, the global group of PEROSH research institutes. So here you will also find, for instance, NIOSH, the American Institute, as a member. These experts are all, as I said, from national PEROSH research institutes. We store docs and guidelines, and we have now almost 100 of these stored and also tagged so that they can easily be found on topic or whatever. Apart from the digital platform, we organize additional video calls between RPE experts in Europe, which is also extremely useful, where we just exchange on the spot the latest state of play when it comes to COVID-19 in Europe. The IT platform was provided by AUFA. AUFA is our PEROSH member from Austria, and it is available on desktop and mobile platforms. And all the e-meetings are chaired by Mary Trainer, our PEROSH Scientific Steering Group chair. Now, what are the discussion trends that we see in the platform discussions? The content of the discussions gradually shifted during time. And I made a sort of ranking here from 1 to 6, and that is basically roughly the shift in content of the discussions we had. Of course, first, a lot of focus was on testing and certification of respiratory protective equipment because the pandemic was really a huge outbreak and everybody was looking for how do we protect healthcare workers, especially, and how do we protect them in a safe way. Then the second topic that immediately became popular, so to say, was the decontamination and reuse of RPEs, because there was a huge shortage of mouth masks, respiratory protective equipment in Europe. So I will say a little bit more about it later on. There was a lot of intention for decontamination and reuse. We also discussed the shortage of RPEs and national production. And then gradually, when the pandemic, the first wave was gone or went down, we discussed return to work procedures. How could workers return to their offices or factories in a safe way? Ventilations issues were discussed, and we had a special focus on outbreaks in slaughterhouses, and especially the migrant workers in Europe clearly were quite vulnerable when it came to this. This is an example from Switzerland, where they developed a very advanced method in decontaminating, disinfecting FFP2 masks. What you see here is a sort of exposure cabin, a sort of carousel, where the masks were attached. And first, through dry heat, 70 degrees, those masks, used masks, were dried, and then they were exposed to UV radiance to disinfect them. And this proved to be one of the best methods to reuse FFP2 masks. Important findings. First of all, the quality of the RPEs. The massive import from China with the so-called KN95 certification, you see an example on the right, posed a real problem, because the labs of our members who were testing those masks found that more than 60% of these Chinese mouth masks were not safe. And Andrew probably will share this with you later on. HSE also issued a safety warning specifically for those respirators in the UK. Then the decontamination and reuse. I gave you an example. But to be quite honest, all experts agreed that this is very time-consuming and complex. And it is not possible in large batches because you probably know that mouth masks are used by the thousands and thousands in hospitals. And you would need to disinfect large batches of used mouth masks to be effective. And that was not possible. Moreover, only the high quality RPEs, for instance from 3M, which is a well-known producer of RPEs, those remained reliable after decontamination. Other masks soon would disintegrate and cannot be reused. So these were some important findings. Furthermore, Germany, as one of the first, started with rapid test protocols for mouth masks, for respirators. And in these rapid test protocols, for instance, the face fit tests were skipped. So the filter qualities were tested, but the face fit tests were skipped. And that was, of course, not perfect, but given the pandemic and the need for mouth masks, this rapid test protocol was introduced. But later it was abandoned. So now they are not using this anymore. And as I said, national production was limited. Europe was very dependent on the import of mouth masks from China. But now this is on acceptable levels in Europe. In the Netherlands, for instance, I know that there is quite a lot of production. And also in the UK, I was told that the national production is now acceptable. As I said, migrant workers, it turned out that these are extremely vulnerable due to their working conditions, but also their housing and transport. Mostly they live together in small housing, poor housing, and they are transported in minivans to slaughterhouses in this case. And there, this was an ideal environment, of course, for contamination with the coronavirus. The specific issue we had in Denmark and the Netherlands is outbreak and also new zoonosis in mink farms where these animals are breeded. And many of these farms have been closed, and the decision now in the Netherlands and also in Denmark is to have them all closed. So this complete industry of mink production is now being closed. And all in all, our finding is that through PEROSH, this rapid early sharing of information and knowledge was really an emerging issue in different countries to avoid that the wheel is invented again. So this is what I would like to share with you, and then I would like to give the floor to Andrew Curran. As I said, he took the initiative for the coordination platform. He will share some experience of making use of it, including a rapid review that HSE also made on information retrieved from our platform. So, Mr. Chair, I would like to give the floor. I will stop sharing my presentation and I will give the floor to Andrew Curran.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Jan Michiel Curran. Now, any question? I cannot see any chat question. Yes. Now, Mr. Professor Andrew Curran, PEROSH, Steering Committee for Health and Safety Exclusive. Now, he experienced with the share. Please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. As Jan Michiel has said, I'm Andrew Curran. I'm HSE's Chief Scientific Advisor. HSE is the regulator in the UK, and we base a lot of our work on the best science available. And I thought it'd be useful just to share some of the experiences that we've had working in this post-COVID world, where obviously the use of information is really, really important. So I want to talk about what we have learned from research, how we've delivered through the collaboration that Jan Michiel so beautifully described, talk a bit about what we've learned, show some of the experiences that we've had delivering what we call a COVID secure work environment in the UK, and then just a few conclusions about how that PEROSH platform has been so valuable in providing us with a substrate to move forward. Okay, so I think one of the first things that we started to realise as our involvement with the COVID issue grew was that we were dealing with a very significant issue, and that issue really related to the amount of information that we were having to process. So if you look at the top graph, that's basically a readout of publications on influenza since 1917, and you can see that the search terms I use there picked out 134,000 publications. If we then move down to the bottom graph, that's for COVID, and that's just in the year 2020, and this was a snapshot taken in June. So within the first 6 months of COVID work, we'd already generated nearly 33,000 publications that were providing us with information. So a very, very rapid production of information that had to be synthesized and understood. And that difference, I think, was one of the reasons why I suggested that PEROSH set up a platform to help share knowledge and experience and those evidence syntheses so that we could best utilize that knowledge in our local areas to ensure that our populations were being appropriately protected. The benefit of all of this is that I think by having a platform that enabled us to share information quickly, it meant that we could focus on specific topics very quickly and provide a view across a large number, 13 plus organisations in the PEROSH network, about some of the issues of concern. That was very supportive in the response to the pandemic at the national level. So we could draw down on that knowledge and expertise very quickly and very appropriately to ensure that we had the information available to us. And therefore we could get it to the people who needed that information very, very quickly. It also meant that we could produce outputs that were accessible, that we could establish relationships between researchers, and that we could make sure that those relationships were of mutual benefit, particularly as the evidence on this particular topic evolves. There are some risks. With any system there are risks, and of course sometimes the pace means that we don't always have the rigor that we would have from a normal sort of publication route. We felt that there was potentially the danger of groupthink, given that the organisations as part of this network were drawn from the same background, a health and safety background, but I don't think there was any evidence that that was happening. I think there was always the risk that we weren't challenging effectively. There was also a risk that we perhaps were producing information that was too similar. But I think the one issue that we did identify was that clearly working on COVID for so much of our time with so many of our people meant that we could have a detrimental effect on other issues which are of importance in protecting the workers of Europe. But the most important thing for me was that we created, through the fantastic work that all our researchers did, sharing information, an opportunity to mitigate those risks through the network that we'd established over many years. Jan Michiel's already mentioned the fact that our government chief scientific advisor in the UK asked me if we could do a rapid evidence review on a couple of topics to start with, and then that broadened out into a range of topics. Started off looking at the equivalence of different standards for masks, in this case N95 and FFP2, so that when purchasing decisions were being made, we were making them appropriately. And then we also looked at the role of aprons, gowns and eye protection in preventing transmission of the virus in healthcare workers. And you can access that report from our website on the page shown below. At this point as well, I became one of the members of our government advisory committee, the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, chaired by our government chief scientific advisor, which brought together experts from academia and from the government science community, including myself, to make sure the government's response to COVID-19 issues was informed by the best quality science and evidence. And I've been very proud to be able to draw on the PEROSH knowledge and experience to help inform that UK government position. If we then think about that collaboration and what it's delivered, Jan Michiel's already talked about some of the PPE stuff, so I won't dwell too much on this. But having access to experts, in addition to the UK experts, was unbelievably valuable. Certainly from our perspective in the UK, we were dealing with an enormous volume of PPE imports. And I was one of three people, still am actually one of three people, who decide whether personal protective equipment is allowed into the UK supply chain. It's the HSE decision-making group, and between from the start of the pandemic to now, we've looked at over 3 billion items of kit, items of PPE, and we've used the information from colleagues in that PEROSH network to help us decide whether we allow that kit into the UK or not. And as Jan Michiel said, one of the issues we had was around the KN95 respirators, particularly those with ear loops, which are a bit of a problem, particularly for UK wearers. So we have used that PEROSH information to help decide what PPE enters that UK supply chain. The other thing we've been doing is making sure that we share the information at a more sort of technical level when it comes to other issues, and Jan Michiel's mentioned some of this already. So making sure we understand the risks and the routes of transmission. And in the UK, we talk about 3 routes: person to person, air and surface. And those risks are affected by the amount of time that you spend in proximity to somebody who may be infected, the amount of virus that individuals may be shedding, the prevalence in the community, and the environmental conditions in which you're working. And being able to have discussions with PEROSH colleagues helped us to synthesize our own information, focus it on our own situation in the UK, and therefore provide good advice to government. Similarly, sharing information around contacts and contact spreading and the various routes that you can use to establish those contacts and put mitigations in place, equally important for us. Jan Michiel has also mentioned the work that we did looking at a variety of different workplaces, starting with food processing, so abattoirs, slaughterhouses, etc. And as HSE, we began very early in the process to provide a framework for our UK businesses to undertake what we call a COVID secure risk assessment. And one of the things that we found very helpful was the fact that the Health and Safety at Work Act, established in 1974, put a requirement on organisations to consider risks and develop a risk assessment as part of a risk management strategy to control those risks. So organisations had the knowledge and the understanding to undertake risk assessments. as part of that process, we wanted them to consider the hierarchy of risk control and the hierarchy of risk control in the context of COVID-19. Now, the hierarchy of risk control starts at the top of this inverted triangle with elimination. And clearly, you can stop a work activity if it's not considered essential. Next on the list is substitution, and working at home is a good substitution alternative in the case of COVID. Then engineering controls, which might be screens, which we see a lot in supermarkets in the UK. Then administrative controls, so signage, one-way systems, changes to cleaning regimes, spacing marked out on the floor to encourage social distancing, etc. And then only when absolutely necessary do we encourage people to use PPE, because PPE is very difficult to include in a routine for managing COVID, because you have to make sure it fits properly, you have to make sure you've got a good supply, you have to make sure that the behaviours are right and it's being worn properly. So we would only recommend that as a last port of call. We also require people to make sure that they have considered the 3 routes of exposure that I've described: air, surface and person to person, and that they've developed defence in depth with a bundle of mitigations based around this hierarchy of control, so that they can reduce the risk of people catching SARS-CoV-2 virus in the work environment to as low as reasonably practicable. Apologies for the quality of this graph, but this is some data from work that we've been doing to see how companies are performing when it comes to delivering a COVID secure work environment. So we have now been out to many thousands of workplaces with our inspectors, supplemented by telephone interviews with workplaces to capture information about their approach to delivering that COVID secure world. And you can see on this slide that, and I took this data from the end of October, we've done nearly 32,000 inspections. Actually, the most recent number is over 50,000. So we are doing a lot of inspections in workplaces. And the colours on the graph, you may not be able to see them, but the biggest colour there, the sort of pink colour, orange colour, are those organisations that from our inspectors' activities, we believe are compliant against those COVID secure requirements. The green bar at the top are those where we've had to take some action, and the little, very, very small yellow bar at the top is those organisations where we've not been able to follow up. But what you can see, I think, is that the majority of people are delivering a COVID secure environment, and this just summarises that data. So for those organisations where we've had to intervene, the majority of them have had just verbal advice. Less than 20% have had written correspondence, and enforcement actions only been required in a very, very small number. So for me, it's really encouraging that UK work environments appear to be able to achieve sufficient control to enable us to say that their workplace is COVID secure. When we do go and find things, as shown on that last slide, these are the kinds of issues that we can identify as perhaps not being as good as they should be. So the largest slice of that pie chart is for social distancing. So clearly people are still having some issues making social distancing work. Cleaning regimes is also quite important, and people don't always think about how best to manage cleaning. Management arrangements, also of a similar size, and then other things less so. But being able to identify where the failures are occurring means that at the national level we can then provide much better guidance and advice for those organisations to perhaps help them do things differently and to innovate where they haven't been innovating previously. Jan Michiel showed a very nice picture of an abattoir earlier on. This is a picture of another food processing plant in the UK, taken from some CCTV footage before they'd implemented any COVID secure measures. And I think you can see a production line there where people are very close together, they're directly facing each other, etc. And then after they'd implemented COVID secure measures, this is what they were able to achieve by lengthening that production line, by staggering the way that the workers were arranged so that they weren't directly facing each other, and generally improving the whole layout of the factory so that they could continue production, but in a COVID secure way. In manufacturing plants, people have created spaces that are separated from other workers, which you can see on the right-hand side. And then when they have to go to office environments, clearly they're also thinking about other engineering controls, such as screens, to ensure that exposure is minimized. One of the areas where we have found some problems is in those areas of social interaction. So on the right-hand side here, you can see a socially distanced canteen. Not much fun because everybody's sat on their own, but it's important that all parts of work are considered as part of that COVID secure world. And one of the things that we've been absolutely clear about is that when considering risk, organizations need to think about the journey that each of their workers takes and the activities that they undertake from door to desk and then from desk to door, so that we understand exactly what the potential opportunities for transmission should be. On the left-hand side of this picture, you can see a socially distanced smoking area. Again, thinking about those parts of any system where there are opportunities to interact and putting workplace controls in place to prevent it from happening. My last few slides are just really picking up on some of the points that Jan Michiel made, which again we found extremely useful to discuss with PEROSH members. And this was really about understanding when outbreaks occur in workplaces, the various factors that can lead to that outbreak escalating or being able to be controlled. And I think what it illustrated very clearly was that work is a very complex system. And it shouldn't just be thought about as an individual arriving at 9 o'clock in the morning, doing their work activity and going home. Actually, they have to be seen in the context in which they deliver that work. And that's as part of a community and as part of a business, providing services and skills to organizations to deliver the product or service that they're about. And when you start to unpick the interactions that occur within those kinds of environments, you identify some of the additional points of concern that Jan Michiel talked about earlier, such as how do the workers get to site? If they're in a remote location, are they car sharing? If they are drawn from a migrant population, are we just repeating the social inequalities that we see in the rest of their world? That might be poor housing, multiple occupancy housing, multi-generational housing. It might be that the risk factors haven't been communicated in the appropriate language. And all of those issues ultimately lead to the risk of any workplace providing an opportunity for an outbreak to occur. If you then add in things like young workers and their risk acceptance, given the information that they're receiving about their own personal risk of developing COVID-19, then you get this very complex mix of issues. And we're now being funded by the UK government to undertake a very large multi-million pound study of transmission in workplaces and the environment, drawing down on the knowledge of a large number of researchers, and we have a research team of about 65 people who are working very hard to try and understand the role, not just of the workplace, but also some of the factors that I've described in delivering outbreaks and therefore enabling us to prevent them at source. So in conclusion then, I just want to summarize how PEROSH and that PEROSH network has really helped us deliver differently. Having a preformed network was absolutely invaluable. And of course, any network but works, in my view, through the way that people interact with each other. And you know, one of the great successes of PEROSH has been to establish excellent relationships, not just between organizations, but between individuals, and being able to pick up a telephone and talk to somebody very quickly, which then leads to a Europe-wide approach to a problem, is one of the great strengths of PEROSH. It also gave us that access to synthesized information. And by that, I mean that we didn't have to do all of the work at our individual institute level every time a question was asked. We could go to those institutes and say, have you looked at this question? And if the answer was yes, then we could learn from each other very quickly, which provided an enormously helpful shortcut to address some of those questions that we were being asked. Delivery at pace is a big challenge at the moment. We're all, I think, probably trying to do twice as much, if not 3 times as much as we ordinarily do. And that means that we have to trust people. We have to trust our contacts and our networks to help us. And again, having worked as a network for so long in such a productive way was a way of providing that ability to work at pace and that ability to trust the organizations in the PEROSH network to help us use the information because we knew it would be good quality. So I would say in summary that PEROSH demonstrates and has demonstrated throughout the global pandemic that actually having a preformed network is a hugely valuable opportunity to work at pace, to deliver quality outputs, to make a difference to real people in real workplaces, and to ensure that the investments that are being made globally to address these challenges are being appropriately shared around the research community so that we can make sure that we're not duplicating effort and focusing our activities on those things that really make a difference. So, Mr. Chairman, I will stop there and thank you very much for your attention.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. Any comment and question, the participant? Now, one question for Jan Michiel from Mehmet Erdem.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I saw the question already in the chat and I gave an answer, but I would like to repeat it, perhaps also for the others. Indeed, so-called fit tests are necessary to test if the mask fits well to the face, because you can test a mask and the filtration characteristics can be perfect, but when the mask does not fit well to the face, when there is leakage, then what is the use of a mask? However, these sort of test procedures are very time consuming. And that is the reason why, for instance, the German Institute skipped initially those fit tests, because instead of testing for a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, I think they mentioned, now they could test in 2 or 3 days. And because of the huge income and the huge influx of new mouth masks from China and other producers, this was necessary. But now, as I said today, this fit test again is reintroduced in the test protocol for mouth masks.
Can I add to that as well? I think it's a really interesting question, and we did have a lot of conversations at the start of the pandemic from colleagues in healthcare situations about the need for face fit testing. In the UK, our approach was quite simple, and we established very early on a phrase which we use when we're reviewing any of the PPE that's coming into the UK supply chain, and we used it in this situation as well. And the phrase that we've used is that personal protective equipment must protect the person who's wearing it. And our concern was that if you didn't undertake the fit test, then you may not actually be protecting the individual who was wearing that particular device, because it wouldn't necessarily have been chosen to suit their particular face type. And therefore you were increasing the risk of healthcare workers who were under severe pressure at that time on COVID wards to wear devices that would not protect them adequately. So we did not reduce the restrictions on face fit testing, and indeed they're still in place. So for us, it was quite important to ensure that we could live by that mantra, that personal protective equipment must protect the person who wears it.
Thank you very much. The second question from Mehmet Erdem. In Turkey, we cannot restrict public transportation. Is there any practical approach to overcome this problem?
Yes, really great question. What I've been doing actually, and I've got another one of these events this afternoon, through my colleagues in the Department for Transport in the UK and their Chief Scientific Advisor, I've been running a series of workshops which has essentially covered trains, planes, and this afternoon it's covering ferries. And the approach we've been taking is to do what we're calling a walkthrough risk assessment with the key players in the industry. And what we do essentially is we break down the work activities of the people in those industries to understand exactly what they do during their working day. And this is where the phrase door to desk and desk to door comes from. So from the point at which they arrive at work, what are the things that they do? So it might be that, first of all, they clock into an electronic system. Then their next job might be to have a conversation with their manager. Their next job might be to get into the cab of the train, and then they drive up and down the train line all day, not getting out of the cab except for comfort breaks. Then they clock off and then they go home. So understanding each of those stages is the first aspect of the conversation. And then we look at the potential for transmission through the three routes: air, surface, and person to person. And at each one of those work activities, we will try and understand what is being done to prevent transmission through those three routes. So, for example, it might be screens around the driver in the cab. And indeed, if you think about people driving underground trains, they will not come into contact with anybody during their time in that cab. So their risk from person-to-person transmission is absolutely zero. But if the cab hadn't been cleaned the night before, following another driver being using it, then there is a risk that they may pick up the virus from the surface of the cab. So ensuring that the cab is cleaned regularly after every shift in a way that's monitored and of high quality means that you can then manage the risk to that driver through appropriate measures. So from a public transport perspective, my suggestion would be to try and work through the various activities that people go through, be it the workers or the members of the public, and to identify how transmission can be prevented through those three routes: air, surface, and person to person. So in the UK, for example, we've just put new guidance out to our bus drivers to say that they should fit screens between them and their passengers, because some bus companies were saying we don't want to do that because it prevents the interaction between the passenger and the bus driver by putting those barriers in place. They will be perspex barriers, of course. They can still see them and smile at them and speak to them, but we've now had to insist that that's the case. So simple, practical solutions, which is why a risk assessment model for doing it becomes so important. And thinking about those three routes of transmission really helps if you then look at it from each individual work activity.
Thank you very much, Professor Andrew and Jan Michiel Meeuwsen. Yes, and no anyone questions?
There was just one more question, Mr. Chair, which was directed to Andrew. It is in the chat.
Yes, I've seen that one, Jan Michiel. So it's at the top, which you've repeated in your message from Mehmet Erdem Alunguni, which is that is it true that masks also help, even if you catch the virus, to have a less severe disease as it reduces the viral load? Essentially, it depends what you mean. So I think there are two things here. Firstly, we would call a mask respiratory protective equipment, and therefore it has to perform to certain standards. If it is not able to demonstrate that it can achieve those standards, then we would call it a face covering. So I'll deal with both of them. So for a mask, if you're wearing a mask, the intent is that it provides protection from others to the wearer, unless it's a surgical mask, in which case it's protecting the patient from the doctor. Obviously, if you're wearing something that covers your nose and your mouth, and it is fitted properly, and you're wearing it properly, and you're wearing it for the appropriate length of time, then it is likely to reduce the amount of virus that you are spreading. And it is likely to protect you from virus that others are spreading via the aerosol route. However, you will also be, if you have the virus, shedding the virus potentially through other routes, through your skin, through through your feces, etc. So just having a mask will not protect others from you if you have the virus. You need to think about other measures, which is why social distancing is so important and why hygiene is so important. So again, and I try and keep the messages simple, and because I think it's easier for people. If you address those three routes of transmission, air, surface, person to person, and you think about your interaction with the environment and how you interact with others in your environment, then I think you should be able to work through a risk assessment that provides you with adequate protection in any circumstance that you're in. And for example, if you are in a crowded space that is badly ventilated, the best thing you can do, from my perspective, is eliminate the risk using the hierarchical controls, and that is get out, because the control in those situations is very, very difficult to achieve. However, if you're working outdoors in an environment where on a nice sunny day with plenty of UV light, then the risk is very, very low. So understanding those things, I think, provides people with the opportunity to make informed decisions as citizens about how they interact with their environment and how others interact with them. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. This time is end of for us, all participants, and you can you share your experience of a participant. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.